Hello everybody and welcome to Forever Red Devils for your latest Manchester United news and updates. And tomorrow we are back in action with Ruben Amorim taking charge of his second game with Manchester United as we take on Burnley Glimt and hopefully an opportunity to get our first win under the belt for Ruben Amorim. And we saw a couple of players back from injury over the weekend. Interesting to see how they will fit in, for example. Will we potentially see a start for likes of Luke Shaw, Till Malacia? Might we see Manuel Ugarte getting a start, for example, or Kobe Manu making his return? We've got Everton over the weekend and then a big game next week against Arsenal. So lots to try and prepare for and to try and get ready in a very short space of time. We're not going to be talking too much about sort of a predicted team because we will be doing that in our evening show tonight. So today we're going to be talking a little bit more about some of the more general stuff happening in and around United. And we will obviously talk a little bit about some of the who we might see. But yeah, we'll do our actual team prediction and that likes in the evening. Before we get into some of the news, please do smash like on the video. Please do subscribe to the channel as well. We're going to start with an interesting story. Manchester United reportedly had scouts at the Arsenal versus Sporting Champions League clash last night, which Arsenal won 5-1. And the big sort of headlines is that Ruben Amorim is reportedly ready to break his one promise. And that was about the fact that he wasn't going to go and raid Sporting. With the United scouts being there, it seems very, very likely that Manchester United will be going after a couple of these Sporting players. And it's only natural, any manager, for example, that's had success with a certain group of players always like to try and bring some of those players to their new club. It's about the familiarity. It's about the fact that they've got a system and they know how it works. Mourinho, for example, how many times he signed Matic, Erik ten Hag, and a couple of other players that he sort of signed. It's very, very normal for a manager to want to bring in players. What will be interesting, for example, is who he prioritizes. Now, Gyökeres seems to be sort of obviously the big one, but there's also the likes of Kunda, for example, talks about Shinchao, but put it this way, we're definitely monitoring them. That is the main thing. So it wouldn't have been a particularly good game last night to have gone and watched and monitored, given the fact that they got absolutely hammered and definitely seemed to be feeling the effects of Ruben Amorim having departed because they just didn't look like a side that was anywhere close to being the side that beat City much over the longer. I mean, City, by the way, meanwhile, are 6 games without a victory, having lost 5 of those. They were 3-0 up last night against Feyenoord and kept it held to a 3-3 draw. So, very, very different City side we're seeing this season. And I think, for example, Liverpool at the moment could very well win the league by virtue of everybody else being pretty, very average. City, for example, last season winning the league only lost 3 games the entire season. They've already lost 3 games this season, and it's not even December. So it's annoying because once again, United are missing an opportunity where I think the league, I don't want to make it sort of seem as it's going to be easier than ever to win, but I think we have seen a lot of teams regress this season. Whereas Liverpool, for example, under Arne Slot, they've just sort of kept going from last season. I don't think they've got remarkably better, for example, but they've kept up their consistency, and the other teams are kind of sort of falling by the wayside. So we've missed a golden opportunity because had we been good this season, for example, if we had a decent start of the season, stuff like that, then we would have really, really been in the mix because it is so competitive right now and it is so tight at the top. And that's a good thing for us because it means that we can catch up. There's a lot of space, for example, a decent run, and you can really get yourself into the mix. And that's what we've got to keep reinforcing to the players. That's what Ruben Amorim needs to keep reinforcing to the fans and everybody, is the fact that we can go on a run, for example. We can put ourselves back into the mix quite easily. We're not far away from being in the contention to be in the top 4, to get Champions League spots. And Champions League is very, very important. And for multiple reasons, for example, and one of them we're going to talk about today. So Manchester United have suffered apparently a £14 million drop in the total revenue in the first quarter, mostly owing to the lack of Champions League football. So we speak about the fact that, we need to get into the Champions League next year. There's so many financial reasons over and above the footballing reasons. The footballing reasons, for example, obviously in terms of the club, we should be a club that should be competing for Champions League. You help, attract better players, for example, your retention of players. If you're sitting there playing in the Champions League every season, for example, eventually challenging for Champions League, you become a destination for the best players in the world. And we need to become a destination once again for the best players in the world, as well as retaining our best players. But also, we're seeing our match day revenue as well as our commercial revenue drop. A lot of that, for example, due to some broadcasting revenue drop due to us not being in the Champions League. So we need to make sure by the end of the season we are back in that mix, because at the moment Ineos are on a massive cost-cutting campaign. They're trying to make the club as profitable, for example, as possible, and trying to sort of really maximize revenue. And you then got to sort of make sure that you are in things like the Champions League. From a sponsor's point of view, from in terms of commercializing the club, you've got to get yourself to being a Champions League club. United can still, sign things like the biggest kit sponsorship deals and title sponsorship deals and the likes of that because of the sheer size of the club. But there's no doubt that at the moment we're kind of running on the reputation of Manchester United rather than the current team. And once we get away from having to run on the reputation, we can really maximize revenue. And you want to be in a situation where you can go and buy the best players in the world. Not to say that, we should just be a club that's spending 200, 300 million pounds every season and just buying new players and not be able to produce anyone. But during the Sir Alex Ferguson era, for example, we were breaking records. We were bringing in, Rio Ferdinand, British record for a British defender. Wayne Rooney was a record signing, for example. We went and spent a lot of money on some really great players, but they were the right players. I think that's the main thing. Nobody minds spending big on players. It's the right players, and that's the problem. At the moment, we've spent really badly on the wrong players. And, Anthony is sort of the usual go-to sort of example of money spent on the wrong type of player. A player which was probably worth maybe half of what we paid for him, but then there's also the United tax. So part of that sort of cost-cutting and budgeting and sort of reworking job that Ineos has is to move away from being a club that are a bunch of suckers and a club that gets taken for a bunch of suckers. And that's not going to be an overnight thing, until you stop paying exorbitant fees, until you, start really putting your foot down, you're going to continue to have that sort of reputation. Now, where United recruitment really needs to improve is that what we need to do is we need to make sure that when Manchester United find players they want, and those players are going to be overpriced, how do we then find viable alternatives that we then go and sign and turn them into a success? You want to be in a situation where you are turning down the £80 million price tag for a defender, going and signing a £45 million or £50 million defender, and they go on to be in like the Premier League team of the season, for example. And United start proving that they are not going to pay inflated transfer fees just because we're desperate. And we actually have the ability to scout out different options and find the different sort of profiles and then back ourselves to have the coaching staff, the manager, and the systems in place to make that player a success. Because once you start doing that, then you'll start paying the market-related rates. And if you sign an £80 million player, that's fine, but they need to be an £80 million player. That's the important thing. Not going and paying £80 million for a £50 million player. £80 million for a £60 million player even. Paying £100 million for a player that probably should be worth 60, And that's where the issue comes with the previous sort of sign. And you look at Harry Maguire and Aaron Wan-Bissaka, for example, and Anthony, and all these type of signings, they also just feed into a narrative that United overpay. And we kind of had this kind of concept of United tax, because so many times we overpaid that clubs now know that they can hold up for our price tag and we will pay it. And we've got to get away from that. We really do. Because until we do, it's an endless cycle, really. And you've got to break the cycle. And sometimes, in breaking the cycle, you might miss out on players. That's going to be okay. We've got to actually also, as fans, be okay with that. We've got to understand that it's about making the right decisions. And it's about understanding that this is going to be a long-term thing, that we're going to have to ride a bit of a wave sometimes, maybe miss out a few players, and, there's no overnight fix. I think that's the main thing. The sooner people realize that Manchester United is not an overnight fix, for example, it's not a situation where you can just bring in 200, 300 million pounds of players and get back to winning, the better for the club. because we've been trying to do that for years now. We've been trying to sort of do these instant patch jobs where we go and find, players who are at the top of their powers and very highly rated players and players who are very expensive and coming from big clubs, high profile players, for example, and we're not seeing the benefits. So we now need to try and change the narrative and change our recruitment strategy to find young players, for example, like what we've seen with a Kobe Manu Garnacho. Players like that, for example, who can progress through the ranks. And then you add smart signings like an Assa Mazraoui, like a Matthias de Ligt, I think was pretty good value if we can get him back to where he is. And you start doing that, for example, you start building a long-term project that is far more sustainable and will hopefully be far more successful. Because at the moment, how do you judge it as signing? You're sitting there going, right, £70 million. Does he go on to play for United for 4 or 5 years? What does he win us in that time, for example? And therefore, can we justify the signing? And if you're going and spending that kind of money on a younger player, and he goes and spends a decade at a club, and you think, well, we basically paid £7 million a year for this player, and how good is that? But the issue comes with players like Di Maria, Lukaku. You're paying 70, 80 million, 90 million pounds at a time for a player. 2 seasons later, they're leaving, and you're cutting your loss, and you're losing 15 to 20 million pounds on them. And you've lost now about 10 million pounds a season on a player that wasn't good enough, that didn't really before. And Daniel Di Maria, it's the biggest fallacy that he was a flop at United. He played well, his output was pretty good. He just didn't want to be there, and and that's why it's called a snake and the whole thing, which is quite warranted. This behaviour, one of the most unprofessional transfers I think you'll see out there, just refusing to come back, basically forcing through a transfer, the likes of that. But let's not get bogged down in old transfers. But the main thing is making sure we start getting value for money when it comes to the transfers. And I think Ineos is going to very much put a bit of a grip, a tight hold on certain spending in terms of making sure we do not overspend. If we're going to go after Gyökeres, make sure we pay a market-related fee for him. Make sure that we are getting something. Basically, we need to start paying what an Arsenal would pay for a player, what a Real Madrid would pay for a player, what other clubs would pay for a player. Not, every other club would pay 50 million for this player, and we end up buying him for 70 million. Because that's what's happened, and that's why, for example, we couldn't get Jared Brathwaite over the summer, because Everton took one look at the offer from United, and they went, no, you've paid this much for this player, you paid this much for this player. The bid that you've submitted is a mockery. You can afford more. We know you can afford more. And we know that you will pay more. And we did well in that we didn't go and pay more. In fact, we actually went and said, right, fine, whatever. We went and signed Lenny Euro, and we went to sign Matthias de Ligt. So we went and signed 2 centre-backs. And we spent a lot of money, especially on Euro. But, we weren't going to be held ransom. We weren't going to be told, well, you like this player, therefore we know you're going to pay through the roofers. And we ended up paying, the market-related fee for Euro. And I think we got a decent price on de Ligt. So generally, I was quite happy with sort of most of the money that was being spent in the summer. I don't think that Joshua Zirkzee was overpriced either. And then Mazraoui right now looks like an absolute bargain. And hopefully you get more of those type of signings. It's amazing that the signing that was the cheapest has been our best. It cost us less than about 13, 14 million pounds. And he's been the most valuable player we've had so far. So there's definitely signs that we are getting better at recruitment based on this past summer. I don't think Zirkzee, for example, has worked so far, but I think that de Ligt is going to be a good signing. I do think that Mazraoui has been a great signing. We wait to see what's going to happen with Lenny Euro when he comes in, but we're talking about a Golden Boy nomination. The fact that we managed to beat out like the likes of Real Madrid means the signs are there for him to be the talent that is worth the kind of money that we paid for him. Whether he ends up becoming that player, well, time will tell. He actually hasn't played an official debut yet for United, and hopefully we might see him tomorrow, if not this weekend. But all signs point to him having been money well spent from a profile point of view. We'll wait to see if that profile can live up to the expectation. There's a couple of other transfer rumours floating around, and one of the rumours is that apparently contact has been established between Juventus and Manchester United striker Joshua Zirkzee for a potential move in January. I still find this a very strange transfer if it does happen. Look, he hasn't really worked at the moment, but if we can get a similar price tag, for example, and we can basically turn around for within a couple £1 million, happy days, whatever. If it didn't work, whatever, and he's a player that Erik ten Hag liked, he brought in Ruben Amorim decides not really my profile type of player, and we can cut our losses and we can get a decent amount of money for him, then great. What we don't want to sit there and see now is Xerxes leaving for substantially less than what we got him for 6 months later, because that again becomes an admission that we don't know what we're doing with our transfers and that we are still signing bad players and we're still not paying suitable transfer fees for players. I don't see this transfer happening, but we'll have to wait and see. And because the main thing from them is the fact that they're worried about losing Vlahovic. And if he does go, for example, then what happens and who sort of leads the line then? But again, I'm not entirely sure that Xerxes is the right player for them in terms of leading the line and being that genuine number 9. But again, I suppose not really our decision to make. Who are we to decide what is best and what is not best for the likes of Juventus? But again, my main thing is that if we do sell him, we've got to make sure we get our money back for him. Because otherwise, loan him for 6 months and let him go and get some stats, let him go get some form, for example, and then let's try and sell him for a similar amount in the summer. I think that he could work in the number 10 roles, in those dual number 10 roles and behind the striker here in the Ruben Amorim system. And I'd like to see him get the opportunity to try. I think we've got a very good player in Joshua Xerxes. I think that we've realised now, even by his own admission, he's not an out-and-out 9. And I think that that's what we needed and we didn't really get that. But there's nothing to say that, for example, we've got Eriksen leaving in the summer. At this stage, his contract's not going to be renewed. We've got Casemiro, who's getting old, for example. Mason Mount has struggled with fitness. So I don't see we've seen, for example, somebody like a Joe Linton, who dropped deeper into the Newcastle midfield and is an absolute revelation. It's changed his career. It's changed Newcastle. So we've seen other players sort of change positions. And I think that if you look at the profile of Joshua Xerxes, then I think that he really could suit that sort of dual number 10 position and he could really thrive in United. But he's got to get given the chance. And I'd be very interested to see how he does work in this system. Because if he does, for example, start and starts settling into the system and starts finding a bit of form, then hopefully we've actually looked at the going, well, actually, this is the perfect type of player we've got. And who knows, maybe he goes and starts getting a few assists and the likes. So I still think that we've got an opportunity to get Joshua Xerxes right. I've still seen enough from him where you could see the promise there. Maybe not necessarily as a goal scorer, out-and-out goal scorer, but as somebody who's going to help create goals, for example, somebody who's going to be the link-up player. I think it's somebody there. And I think that the sooner we get him opportunities and we get him onto the field, for example, the sooner we'll know exactly where he's at. And I'm hoping that we're going to see him maybe potentially against Bodo Glimt, for example, and the likes. But only time will tell. And I just think I'll just be frustrated. I think the main thing is about a clean slate. And speaking of clean slates, there's lots of talks about the fact that Harry Maguire, who was somebody that apparently Erik ten Hag wanted to sell, he could actually get a bit of a new lease on life under Ruben Amorim in this 3-at-the-back system. And I think he will, actually. I think that this 3-at-the-back could really, really suit Harry Maguire. I think if you've got your centre-back options as Maguire, Euro, De Ligt, Martinez, for example, Luke Shaw can play as either the left centre-back or as that sort of wing-back, wing role. I think that's a really, really good combination of players. I think Johnny Evans will obviously move back will retire and move out of the club at the end of the season. He's done a good job for us now, but I don't see him beyond the season. But I truly think that Harry Maguire could come back into the mix and really thrive in the system. And if he does, then why not? At the end of the day, he's played really well for us in the last couple of years. He's definitely responded. And if we can get him playing towards the best of his ability, then why not stay? Why not keep him? Yes, he's on big wages at the end of the day, but it's if you've got the players who are playing well and are performing, then you can keep them. You don't have to offload them for the sake of offloading them. We're trying to save wages in terms of players who are not worth their wages. If he's starting week in, week out, and he's really doing the business, then he's worth his wages at the end of the day. And I do think that in the 3-back system, I think he could really work quite well. We've seen him, the last season, I think he played really well. And, I think he would have been a sure starter for England. I think that England really missed him I think that probably shows you just how well he was playing last season. The fact that, you know, lots of people saying that England did miss him. So it's going to be an interesting one to see how they sort of go about that Harry Maguire situation, you know, in terms of giving him opportunities when he's fit. He won't go in January. That's the main thing. So he'll have his opportunities through the rest of the season. And if he takes them, then I personally would have no issue keeping him whatsoever, because I think that he can work. I think we've seen moments where he's played well that have been worth sort of than keeping him. And hopefully he continues to show that when he does come back. But we're going to wrap that up there for this morning's show. We'll be back live tonight at 7:30. So make sure that you tune in then. Please do smash like on the video. Please do subscribe to the channel as well. Thank you very much for watching.